Welcome to the broadcast tonight. French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy takes a look at the issues that drive America in his new book called American Vertigo.
I think that the workings of democracy in America are more alive than ever. That when you go in the depth of the country and of the population, the workings, the vitality is here. No point about that, no question. But I think that the risks which Tocqueville pointed at his time are still there too. The margin between democracy and tyranny, this was the point of Tocqueville. The margin between democracy and tyranny is very thin. It is still thin.
Also this evening, Senator Ron Wyden and his proposal to reform the tax system. It is called the Fair Flat Tax Act of 2005.
As Bill Bradley said, everybody's going to tell you it's impossible. Can't be done. Too complicated. Too many lobbyists. Everybody's working for their little section in the code. But if you go out to people and say, if you get rid of all this clutter, I get rid of more than 40 tax breaks on the personal side and the business side, you can lift all the boats.
Bernard-Henri Lévy and Senator Ron Wyden next. Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
The Coca-Cola system sponsors youth sporting events in the United States and around the world, like an English soccer tournament for 37,000 girls and boys, satisfying a thirst for healthy living. The Coca-Cola Company.
Charlie Rose on PBS is brought to you in part by J.P. Morgan Chase, providing financial services and solutions to more than 30 million consumers, institutions, corporations, and governments worldwide.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide. From our studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Bernard-Henri Lévy is here. He is a philosopher, he is a journalist, he is a filmmaker, he is a man of many tasks. His many books include Barbarism with the Human Face, which made him famous. Before this, he wrote Who Killed Daniel Pearl? The new book is called American Vertigo, Traveling America in the Footsteps of de Tocqueville. I am pleased to have him here back at this table. A point of personal discovery and disclosure, he is a friend of mine. We have known each other. I am a small, tiny part of this book because he went with me to North Carolina. And I am pleased to have him back at this table to talk about America and France and the world and who we are and what our future looks like through his eyes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to be here again, my dear Charlie.
Tell me how this book came about.
This book was previously at the beginning an idea of a magazine, of the Atlantic Monthly and of Colin Murphy, who wanted a French intellectual, a foreigner, to travel all over America, to take time to do it, to take months, maybe 1 year. At the end of the day, it was 9 or 10 months, to go all over it, coast to coast, by car, little cities, big towns, highways, tiny roads, and to relate what America is today. Its contradiction, its dividing lines, its dark sides, bright sides, what is still alive in American democracy, what is in crisis today, and what is at stake.
How much of a role did Democracy in America, written when de Tocqueville was 30, play in how you framed this?
It was the beginning of the adventure, of course. The idea was to follow the footsteps of Tocqueville. So I began like that, but very soon I think I escaped and I went my own pace. But on some points, for example, the question of the prisons. I visited a lot of prisons in this country, till Guantanamo, from Rikers Island in New York till Guantanamo. This will of visiting prisons obviously came from Tocqueville, who was commissioned at his time by French government for that. So this was a Tocquevillian point, by sure. And it is an important point of the book. For example, about Guantanamo, I discovered, or I found, that Guantanamo did not did not fall from the sky, but that it was a mechanical and logical product of the penitentiary system of America.
Even though it was steeped in a response to 9/11.
Of course, it was...
A sense that America had been under attack and we would do anything.
America was under attack. America had to react to this attack. It was a sort of war, but nevertheless, I visited Guantanamo, I spent a few days there, I spoke with people. I think Guantanamo was a bad reaction. Number one...
Bad reaction, but why is it connected to the American penal system?
Because the way it is built, the extraterritoriality of it, the way of separating the world of the detainees from the world of the living, so all the structure of the system is related, seems to be like a carbon copy of what else I saw in old prisons closed since long time like Alcatraz, or in living prisons like Angola in New Orleans, or the women penitentiary jail of Nevada or Rikers Island.
Do you believe America's penal system is the worst in the world? Do you believe that we are more barbaric than the French are in their penal system?
I don't think so. All penal system can be barbaric, of course. But there are 2 points in the penal system of America which might be more barbaric than some of the European. Number one, death penalty. Death penalty is like a dark shadow over the whole system. You feel it. Even if the number of really killed is declining, it is there. And you cannot visit a corridor of death without being struck by this terrible right which a state gives to itself to take the life of somebody who might be innocent, who might be completely weak, at this man who was taken at the San Quentin jail of Los Angeles a few days ago, diabetic, blind, completely paralytic on his chair. This is barbaric, 1 point. And second point, the big number of very petty delinquents, very petty criminals who are in the American jails. Sometimes you have the feeling that some of the people who are there, little dealers of drugs, poor people coming from slums or homeless areas, might have not their place necessarily there.
Well, the argument also goes that once they get there, they become criminals because of the nature of the system.
And they become after,
when they might not have otherwise if they never went into the system.
So there is some problems.
Let me go back to the beginning of this. I want to talk about the penal system, but back to de Tocqueville. His examination, Democracy in America, was, the thesis he came away with, central, was democracy was a great thing and that it would soon come to Europe. He also worried about the tyranny of the majority. What did you find in your tour about respect for individuals, respect for the dissent, respect for the minority?
I think that the workings of democracy in America are more alive than ever. That when you go in the depth of the country and of the population, the workings, the vitality is here. No point about that, no question. But I think that the risks which Tocqueville pointed at his time are still there too. The margin between democracy and tyranny, this was the point of Tocqueville. The margin between democracy and tyranny is very thin. It is still thin.
How so? Today?
How so? Today. For example...
Where is tyranny around the corner?
Around the corner,
In terms of wiretapping? In terms of...
Wiretapping is, of course, something of which, if I was an American, I would be concerned by.
But there's a debate in this country about it. The president is so concerned about it, he's out talking to people about why he did it.
The great thing in America is that where you have something like that, the reaction is immediate. The debate is huge. The civil society produces immediately, at once, the antibodies, the antidotes, the check and balances, which controls the situation. Of course, this is one example. You have also tyranny of majority because of the mass consumption, because I visited, for example, in Minneapolis, this huge mall of America, which is supposed to be a place where you can spend all your life from birth to death.
Buying anything you want.
Buying anything you want, walking at lunchtime, flirting if you are a young man, having your birthday when you are 16 years old, getting married for $99.99 in 15 minutes, in 5 minutes, and so on and so on. This school of conformity, this temple of consensus, this pattern which produces, which would like to produce individuals all same to each others, is of course a school of, I would not say tyranny, but at least a majority law which erases the singularity of the individuals. But people resist to that. Look, I was in Los Angeles, for example. I had some great time with a group of citizens, of women who were opposing the creation of a Walmart in their area. They think that a Walmart here was not necessary because there is one not very far and so on, and they are winning. The civil society, the real democracy is winning.
2 points. One is that one of the things that Tocqueville did not notice was a lot of debate in America, and you're saying that debate in America is alive and well.
More than alive. This was one of the cliches which we have about America in France and in Europe, the cliche of a pragmatic America only obsessed by her self-interest. No, you have a huge political debate, a battle on values, a battle on political issues. This impressed me so much. Maybe not along the lines which are the generally considered lines, blue and red, democratic and conservatives. But the debate is here, and it is sane. It is democracy.
But you do not believe that the left in America is taking the debate to the country as much as they should on Guantanamo, on the war, on other issues.
Yes, it is true. I found, again, I say what I observed. I met the people. I tried to find the right people being on the move, and my impression was that the left, if it can be called the left, had its gold age in the 60s and the 70s. She succeeded a lot when you go in the South and when you see all the road which has been done on, for example, the racial issue. It's huge. I don't know I cannot imagine a country in the world which could do such a progress on such a hot issue.
Yeah, and you suggest
but today they are frozen. Today they lack.
They being the left, they being what? The idea of changing racism. What's frozen?
What's frozen? The new issues. Okay. There are new issues today.
Right.
For example, poverty, the fight against poverty, the idea that the task of the state could be and should be to protect its citizens against poverty. For example, the left says it, of course, but I don't feel that she says it loud enough. The death penalty. I am surprised that there is not on the left side the huge movement of opinion we could dream of when we love America as I do and the democratic system in America against the death penalty. The creationism. We know that the idea that there is two theories of the building of
intelligent design versus
intelligent design.
Darwinianism.
It is not two theories. It is science on one side
and religion on the other.
No, crookedness on the other side. It is the people who tell us that, for example...
No, creationism is a faith. I mean, that goes to religion as well. It's not science, but it goes to religion.
It is not only a faith. When it pretends to be a science, this is a trick today. Do you have people, I met a lot, who not only say it is our faith, but they give diplomas, they deliver courses and classes, they pretend to be a science.
How do you identify yourself at first? Are you a philosopher, a Frenchman? A philosopher?
I identify myself as a European.
More than Frenchman?
Of French origin.
Really?
A European. You are an American of Carolina
Yes.
origin.
Yes.
I am a European of French origin.
Really?
I would qualify me like this, yes.
More a Europeanist than a
And more.
French.
And more and more.
And this trip convinced you that the idea of Europe had possibilities even after the vote against the European Constitution, even after the things that have taken place in Europe, because you saw how America held together with disparate components.
America, for me, is one of the proofs of the possibility of Europe. Being able to build, to produce American citizens out of so different people coming from all over the world with different language, with different roots, with different ethnicity, and at the end of the day, true American patriots, this proves that we could do it in Europe too. And on this sense, America should be a model for European peoples. And unfortunately, it is often an anti-model. You know what I think about that? It is called anti-Americanism.
Yes, okay. Let me stay with the notion of Americans. In Dearborn, Michigan, where they have a large Arab community, they said to you what? We are Americans.
They told me, number one, we are Americans, and number two, we would love, we dream to accomplish the path of the Jews. We would like to succeed as the Jews did. The model of the Arabs in Dearborn is the history of the Jews
The assimilation
in America.
into America.
Assimilation by keeping your own roots. This compared to France, when you have such an opposition in the
Suburbs
some
of
of
France,
the suburbs
yes.
near Paris. I don't hear that so much, that the fate and the destiny of Jews in France should be a target and should be a model. This is an achievement in America.
But also, your friend and mine, Maurice Lévy, worries about anti-Semitism in France. Why is that?
Why
so much anti-Semitism?
You have anti-Semitism in France. You have it everywhere,
Yeah.
anti-Semitism.
But
in France also, because of I say there is also elsewhere, because I would not like to make believe that France is at the eve of a crystal nacht. It is not.
I know. But at the same time,
but there is.
There is.
Two roots. Number one, the radical Islamists in France. We have some, and they feed the beast. And the second root of it is what I call French ideology, which is an old, homemade, grass-rooted, made in France tradition of anti-Semitism, which we inherited from our writers and intellectuals.
Is Le Pen
right and left? Le Pen?
Is Le Pen anti-Semitic?
Of course.
Okay.
Le Pen is more than anti-Semitic. It is the real fuel of his energy. It is the core of his being, even when he does not express it because he knows that it is difficult. It puts you against the law, but he is definitely.
When Arabs come to France, they immediately accept it as French. You tell them, you're French. You're not Arab, you're French. And you're saying that in America there's a longer process of being assimilated, but once you're assimilated, there's a stronger anchor.
Exactly. I think that America, the dialectic between the two belongness, being an American and being an Arab, or being an Hispanic and so on, is more subtle, is more fine, is more subtle. And that this way of telling somebody, you have to become an American, but you may remain what you were, this is a good pattern. It's a pattern which works rather well. If you look at what happened recently in the suburbs in France, it was clear that we have a model, a Republican model, which was great, which had his great time, but which is failing today because too sharp, too hard. You cannot say to somebody who comes, whom you host, you cannot tell him, you just forget immediately what you were because you become all of a sudden a Frenchman. Saint Paul said that to the Greeks and the Jews. There is no longer Jews and Greeks, only Catholic, but our president is not Saint Paul, and our former president was not Saint Paul either. Even de Gaulle was not supported.
What will be the political fallout of the riots in France?
I think that these riots were handled not so bad by the French government. And on this point, I tell you that we have some lessons to take from America. America could have some lessons to take from us also on one point. The way the French government did handle and master the crisis. There was no dead, no blood. It took sometimes not so long, and it's okay now. So the calm has come back. Of course, we'll have to make some progress.
This trip for you was transformative in space, in time, in how you saw yourself in America. How so?
This trip told me a lot about this country. I thought I knew it, and I was so surprised at each step by what I saw, by what I discovered. For example, the generosity. I told about the workings of democracy. It is very concrete. It is not a general idea. The real generosity of the civil society. The Katrina disaster, Katrina,
yes.
the hurricane.
Right.
Of course, it was the revelation of the failure of the state, but also it was a revelation of something else, the way in which the inhabitants of Texas, whatever their political opinion and ethnic origin, opened their arms, opened their heart, and opened their wallet to the survivors of the Tennessee disaster. Tens of thousands who came in their school, in their houses. They hosted them with such hospitality. I'm not sure there is so many countries in the world, including in Europe, where you would have seen that. So this trip told me something about that, for example.
So for all the pain and suffering, for all of the dislocation, there was something positive that came out in your judgment, which was the opening of hearts and the generosity of the American spirit to its neighbor.
I think that one of the strangeness of this country is that each time you have a crisis, a dysfunctionment of the democratic system, up, you have the correction down. For example, the system of education, which is in such a bad shape in America. You have since a few years a reaction coming from down, from the citizens themselves, which is called the homeschooling. It has some bad aspects, but it proves that there is the workings, the energy, the vitality, the youthful optimism who allows the fathers and the mothers to take over the task and to say we will not let our children be destroyed by a stupid, badly funded educational system.
If the schools are bad, we'll take care of our own children.
We take over.
Okay.
This is for me, America, as I discovered it with my candid eyes.
One thing you said was that there is more anti-Americanism in France than Francophobia in America.
Yes, I think so. Francophobia in America, I was told that it was a tide, that it was a huge wave, that I will be welcomed by tomatoes or spoiled eggs. It was the contrary. Frankly, Charlie, I spent 9 or 10 months during this trip. I met hundreds of men and women, maybe more. I never met one single of them who looked down at me in a dismissive way because I was French. This is a lie. Some people believe that in New York, maybe. Some people believe that in the headquarters of DC, headquarters of the big politicians. They are wrong. And I remember when John Kerry was afraid of his shadow.
Would not do an interview with you during the campaign in the beginning.
Because of that.
Until he found out it wouldn't be published until after the election.
He was afraid that a Frenchman could say 2 days before the election that he spoke with him. But this was an absolutely ignorance of the reality of his country. The press attaché of John Kerry, who believed that wearing a Hermes tie or drinking some Vitel water or speaking with BHL could be a crime, they just don't know their country. It is absurd. It is absurd. Francophobia is a myth in this country. We have some discussions, but man to man. Our diplomats were not in agreement on some very important issues. It did not mean phobia.
But you say that anti-Americanism in France is part of the ideology.
It's something else. I think it is decreasing also. I think it is declining today. But I believe, yes, that it is really part of our culture. And it is part of the way in which we figure, in which we define our way of being a nation. In one word, when you are a nation who pretends to be a nation because you have common roots, and when you see a people who pretends to be a nation because he has a common creed, when you define your nationhood by the grass, and when you see a people who define it from the sky or the values, there is a problem. And we were always at odds with these strange American people who, like the people of Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the Social Contract, said, we come from everywhere, we have nothing in common, but we decide to agree on some principles, some democratic principles. This is America. I'm not saying that all the administration are faithful to that. I'm not saying that America of today is always faithful to this great program, but it is a program of America, and my conclusion, the conclusion of my American Vertigo, is that it is still alive. Vertigo, yes.
Yeah, why do you call it Vertigo, American Vertigo?
I call it American Vertigo because my vertigo sometimes, but
your
much
personal
more.
Vertigo,
yes,
sense
but much more, yes, of course.
Out of balance by...
Of course, when you see a fair at Fort Worth, when they sell some machine guns, when they sell freely some Nazi weapons, you have a vertigo. You don't know exactly where you are any longer, and you have the feeling suddenly not to be any longer in the America of Bill Clinton, John Kennedy, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington. You have the impression to be elsewhere. It gives a vertigo. But it is also the vertigo of the American people himself. I think that today there is a real feeling in this country to be at a crossroads.
Yeah, I don't understand that. Why are we at a crossroads?
Why you are at a crossroads? Because I think that I met many people who know less well than before, than 40 years ago at the Kennedy time. There was a sort of simple pride of being an American. You knew exactly for which values you fought. Today, I'm not sure. Well, the Americans know always. One example, my dear Charlie, I met maybe the most important meeting of my encounter of the book. I met a great woman, Mrs. Ashcraft, the mother of a young American soldier dead in Iraq, a few months after the beginning of the war. She had the feeling that her son was dead for nothing, for a meaningless war, for values which were not the real values of America. I could not find myself one word of consolation or solace, nothing to tell her. And this I found in the eyes of this great woman something like a vertigo. Who am I? What is this country? What sort of message is he addressing to the world? This was her vertigo. But when you have vertigo, you have also a railing. You hold on to a railing. And she did hold on to her railings, which were the memory of her son, and which were the American creed, the values of the founders of this country.
Let me move to this question. There's some people who worry about America's future because of this. They worry that their life of their children may not be as good as their life in terms of what's going to happen to their future. They feel a bit insecure about their future, their pension plans, what they expected to have, and will their children have a better life than they had, which is what most of us hope for our next generation. Okay. Yes?
Okay.
So that causes some concern in America. Did you find that, some sense that this contract I have with this nation that I believe in is shaken?
Strangely, I never...
More about economics than about politics.
Strangely, I never felt I did not meet anybody who had the feeling that the contract was shaken. This is one of the miracles of this country. Whatever are the problems, whatever can be the poverty in some areas, the feeling of the contract, of the belongingness is strong. But, of course, vertigo, for example, the healthcare system. So many people told me about what will happen if they become ill.
Yeah, that's my point. Healthcare,
of course, there is healthcare.
It's a contract.
There is
yeah.
Again, the greatness of this society is that she invents the American society. She produces some alternative systems. The churches, the philanthropy, the social activities, all these material of societies which Tocqueville described and depicted 1,000 times better than I would
the
do. American network,
yeah.
American
yeah.
network
yes.
of philanthropic societies. But is a society charity or justice? I think that a good democracy mixes the two, charity and justice. Maybe in France we are too much on the side of justice. Maybe you are too much in America on the side of charity.
Interesting point. That's a philosophical point.
Yeah.
There are many, you talk about patriotism in America. And flags.
Yeah.
You believe it shows how fragile we are?
Yeah. Generally, the cliche consists in saying the contrary. All these flags prove that American people is proud, arrogant, dominator. Peuple sûr de lui et dominateur. Sure of himself and dominator, de Gaulle about the Jews. This is a cliche about Americans. I have a different impression that this overstressing, over-affirmation, as always, as in private life, when you over-affirm somebody, it means that you doubt a little, that you are not so sure. And I think that this way of building a national link with a creed and not with a soil, with a text and not with a race, with a multi-ethnicity and not with the imagination, the imaginary of a common race, this is great, but it is also a source, it can be a source of weakness. And this weakness is the greatness of America. And when you see so many flags, this tide of flags I bumped on when I arrived in Newport, it might be the sign of that. There is a great book of Alan Wolfe called A Nation After All. In France, we are a nation before all. In America, you are a nation after. At the end of the day, you are a nation.
There's an idea in America called American exceptionalism, that we are somehow a special nation.
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
I don't like very much this idea for America and for France. We also believe that. And maybe it is one of the source of our problems. Yeah. Two nations who pretend to be special, who believe to have a special gift given by God and a mission to promote it.
Yes.
I don't like it so much, but
God and creed.
God and creed, God shows us the way and asks us to promote it. I don't like very much. It can be very dangerous.
But is it because of the religion part or because of?
Because of on this case, of the excessive pride it gives. You have to be fearful. We know that in France so much of a nation who believes that she has
a mission
given by God. No, democracy is doubt. Democracy is uncertainty. Democracy is at every single moment, are we right? But when manifest destiny means, for example, that democracy is worth of everybody, that any people in the world can have democracy, I cannot disagree.
What is your problem with Cooperstown?
My problem
Cooperstown is where the Baseball Hall of Fame is located.
Yeah.
People in America, Jacques Berzern said famously,
but
to know baseball is to know America.
I agree with that. That's what I try.
Cooperstown is where we honor baseball.
No. You do two things in Cooperstown, Charlie. Number one, you honor, which I cannot disagree with.
The Hall of Fame ceremony.
Ceremony, perfect.
Babe Ruth and Ted Williams and
Bravo.
Willie Mays and
Bravo, I like this. It belongs to the civic religion of America, and liking this country, I tried to apply myself to know Cooperstown and baseball.
Well, you didn't
And it is
succeed.
No, I did, but there is something else in Cooperstown.
What?
Cooperstown pretends that baseball was born in Cooperstown. Cooperstown celebrates the fact that this old sport, which came from ancient Egypt, or at least from England, was born here. And I think that this way of dropping the depth,
Where was baseball born?
it is a very immemorial sport. You have traces of it all over the centuries. So this way of saying, no, it was born here, in this sacred place, there is something which is like a sort of denegation of the memory, denegation, refusal of the past. America was born also on that, of course, breaking the ropes with Europe, reinventing something else. It has good aspects, it can have also bad aspects.
And the role of religion and the divide between religion and state is an ongoing, increasingly debated. It goes back to the issue about creationism as well. Tell me what you found about us and our religion.
Number one, I think that America, contrary to the cliche again, is still a secular country, which means the wall of separation of Jefferson, more or less,
Church and state.
it is threatened, but still alive. But number two, more serious, I have the impression that something is happening in the American religion which is quite new, I visited some of these mega churches. I described the mega church of Willow Creek, for example, and my impression is that they are no longer, or less and less, what we called in our youth Judeo-Christianism. Judeo-Christianism was what? It was the idea of a God which is present in our heart and absent in the sky, which is very close to us and very far, who talks and who is silent, who illuminates us and who leaves us in darkness. Alternatively, this is the depth of the creed of a Christian of the old times. These churches, something new appears. A God who speaks all the time. A God who is here at every moment of the life. A God who is here in your kitchen when you cook your eggs and bacon. Who is here in the garden when you cut your grass. Who is here.
The all-powerful and all-knowing and all-involved God.
Who speaks all time. And this sort of God who becomes a sort of best buddy, a sort of good neighbor, this God becoming the best of the American guys, is no longer the God of the old Christian, therefore Jewish, also tradition. So something is happening there which Tocqueville did not foresee and which might be a real phenomenon with huge consequences in the future.
American Vertigo, traveling America in the footsteps of Tocqueville. Bernard-Henri Lévy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. And we'll be right back. Stay with us.